The vicar of Hathercombe Magna had always insisted that his church candles were cut to the regulation length, 12 inches for the nave, 16 for the chancel, and he was known to rebuke the verger with uncommon vigour should any discrepancy arise. Thus, it was all the more surprising when Mrs. Robotham, the church cleaner, discovered the morning after All Souls' Day that all the candles had burnt to stubs, dripping wax like small white suicides across the altar rails. Surprising, too, that she should find Mr. Quentin Damery lying on the choir tiles, with his throat slit open like a hymn book. Mr. Damery had been something of a disappointment to the village. A scholar of indifferent Latin and excessive pride, he had returned from Oxford some 20 years ago, muttering darkly of corruption in the examination system, and taken up residence in the old schoolhouse, a grim Jacobean relic whose windows looked rather reproachfully at the vicarage across the green. He had earned his crust by tutoring boys too fragile for rugby and too stupid for Winchester, and, in recent years, by contributing half-literate letters to the Times on the decline of classical education. When the news broke, first whispered in the High Street, then flying like a disreputable hymn tune through the tea-rooms and drapery, Hathercombe was aghast, though not precisely bereaved. Miss Slynn, who ran the lending library, was heard to murmur that the only mystery was why someone hadn't done it years ago, while the vicar's wife fainted quite dramatically, thereby diverting attention from the far more inconvenient detail that it was her husband who had discovered the body. "I do wish," said Lord Peter Wimsey that same afternoon, gazing at the corpse from the chapel doorway, "that people who choose to be murdered would have the decency to do so at a more civilized hour. There is something infinitely demoralizing about crime committed by candlelight. It implies an aesthetic sensibility one is quite unwilling to attribute to the average Englishman." "Mr. Damery was rather a peculiar case," said Inspector Arbuthnot, who was standing with folded arms beside the font, trying not to look at the blood that had seeped under the choir screen. "Didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't go in for anything improper. Bit of a bore, frankly." "A man may bore others and still be of infinite interest to himself," said Wimsey, producing a monocle and fixing it on the world with the air of one applying a moral correction. "I should like to see the vestry, and the candle stubs if you'd be so good." Arbuthnot gave a short nod and led him through the side door, past a confused clatter of parishioners and constables. The vestry smelled of mildew and incense. A brass candlestick lay knocked over on the floor. Someone had scrawled a Latin phrase on the blackboard above the coat hooks. Fiat lux, sed non nimis. "Let there be light, but not too much of it." "Quaint," murmured Wimsey. "Not Damery's hand, I think. Too round. Schoolboy, perhaps." "Mr. Damery did coach a few of the lads for confirmation, though I understand most of them went down with colds and didn't return. No one's owned up to the writing. Could be an old prank." "Indeed. And what time was the body found?" "Vicar says 7:15. Came in early to prepare for morning prayers. Found Damery here, quite dead, and ran for the verger, who fetched the constable." "And the candles?" "Ah, that's the queer bit. The lot of them burned clean down. Nothing left but wax puddles. Funny thing is, Vicar swears he locked the church himself last night. Says Damery wasn't in the building when he left at 9, but we found no signs of forced entry. Then either Damery was hiding in a font or someone possesses a duplicate key," said Wimsey brightly. He turned on his heel and surveyed the church interior through the doorway. "Notice, Bunter?" "Yes, my lord," said the valet, who had appeared silently like an obedient spectre. "The chancel carpet bears impressions of wax drips at irregular intervals. The spacing suggests a slow circuit around the altar." "Good. It means we are dealing with a person capable of walking in circles, which significantly reduces the suspect list. Tell me, has anyone accounted for the vicar's wife at the time of the murder?" "She claims to have been unwell and in bed all night, my lord." "Well, we shall allow her the benefit of the doubt and a second pillow, for now." Wimsey removed a pair of kid gloves and examined a stub of candle on the ledge. "All burnt down, you say, and all evenly?" "Precisely. Then either someone was conducting a satanic ritual, doubtless after brushing up on their Latin, or they required the church to be lit for rather a long time, in which case, one wonders, why not bring a torch? "There's one other thing," said Arbuthnot, hesitating. "We found an old photograph in Damery's coat pocket. Faded, water-stained, group of schoolboys, one face circled in ink, no name." Whimsy took the photograph, peered at it, and smiled thinly. "Well, well. Shall we see which of our excellent villagers recognizes the face of youth, and which will pretend not to? Bunter, the photograph, if you please. Arbuthnot, tell the verger we'll be holding informal interviews in the vestry. Let us be about it, before the wax sets, so to speak." And with that, Lord Peter strolled up the nave, humming a dirge that only slightly resembled a popular music-hall waltz, and trailed by Bunter, who had already begun taking names. Lord Peter Whimsy had always maintained that one learned more from a village parlour than from a witness box, and that people, like clocks, gave themselves away less in their pronouncements than in their ticks. Hathercombe Magna, for all its delicate lacework of hedgerows and Sunday school decency, had begun to tick rather loudly. The vestry, hastily repurposed as an interview room, bore the marks of ecclesiastical severity. Oak panelling, an antique cupboard of tarnished vessels, and the air of having been slightly affronted by the presence of murder. A pot of tea had materialized through Bunter's usual magic, and the verger had been dispatched to summon anyone who might have had occasion to speak with Mr. Damery during the previous 48 hours. They began, as one must, with the verger himself. Mr. Prowse was a cadaverous man of 60-odd years, who gave the impression of having been born in a surplice. He clasped his hat between his hands as though it were some small, misbehaving animal, and gazed miserably at the floor while speaking. "I saw Mr. Damery last about a week ago, my lord. He used to come in every so often, always asking about candles, their weight and tallow content and such. Said it was for a paper he was writing, though I never saw it printed. He weren't right fond of company, sir. Bit sharp with the children if they ran in the aisles. Liked to have the place quiet, he did." "Did he have a key to the church?" "No, my lord. Leastways, not officially. There's 3 keys, mine, the vicar's, and one kept in the vicarage safe for emergencies. Never knew Mr. Damery to have any of them. Yet he managed to be murdered here with all the doors locked and no signs of entry. Curious, isn't it?" Prowse looked stricken. I suppose he might have copied one. Had a mind for that sort of thing. Tinkered with clocks and padlocks in his youth, I heard." Whimsy steepled his fingers. "And the vicar, what is his character?" "A good man, sir. A bit nervous. Likes his routine. But if you're thinking he'd never lift a hand in anger. Reads the epistles out loud in the mornings like clockwork. They say he was once a missionary in India." "India, yes," murmured Whimsy. "Hot weather, sharp steel and all that. Thank you, Mr. Prowse. If you remember anything further, such as a misplaced key or an unlit candle, you may summon Bunter, who is quite as reliable as a rural postbox and twice as discreet." The verger withdrew, and was soon replaced by the vicar's wife, Mrs. Pettigrew, a tall, marmoreal woman with a voice like a pipe organ left out in the damp. She entered the vestry with an air of having postponed Judgment Day to make this appointment. "It is a scandal," she announced, lowering herself into the offered chair. "A scandal and an insult to the sanctity of this parish. My husband is beside himself. The police rummaging through the pews and talk of candles burned down to stumps as though it were some black mass. One might almost mistake it for a ritual," said Whimsy softly. "You didn't happen to hear anything that night, Mrs. Pettigrew?" "I was ill, a touch of neuralgia. I took my powders and went straight to bed. I did not hear the vicar come in, nor go out again, if he did, though I dare say he did not. And your room, is it above the nave?" "No. Overlooks the garden. A perfectly ordinary view. Rhododendrons mostly." "Alas," said Whimsy, "so few murders are ever committed among rhododendrons." She frowned. I do not find this a matter for levity. Nor do I, Mrs. Pettigrew, but experience has taught me that tragedy and absurdity are oft caught in the same net. Do you know this young man?" He handed her the faded photograph. She studied it with a pursed expression. It might be Julian Tesk, the one with the bicycle accident, though I can't be certain. They all look so much the same in those dreadful uniforms. Julian Tesk. His mother lives in the village. Poor woman. The boy was quite promising until he fell off his bicycle at the age of 16 and developed a morbid personality. I believe he was one of Mr. Damery's pupils. Was he now? Whimsy's eyes narrowed. Do you recall anything peculiar about his lessons, or his relationship with Mr. Damery? Mrs. Pettigrew stiffened. Nothing I should care to repeat. Ah, that kind of peculiarity. I see. Then let us leave it unsaid for now. She rose, gathering her scarf with regal disapproval. I should be grateful if the press were kept at bay. We have an autumn fete approaching, and scandal tends to put people off sponge cake. I shall do my best to preserve the sanctity of your sponge, murmured Whimsy. Bunter returned at the precise moment of her departure, bearing a notebook and his usual expression of unflappable diligence. If I may, my lord, he said, a Miss Slynn awaits outside. She insists on speaking with you personally. Miss Slynn? Ah, yes, the oracle of the lending library. Let her in, Bunter. One must never slight a librarian. They hold the keys to all the dangerous books. Miss Slynn was thin, angular, and wore spectacles large enough to frighten birds. She sat down briskly and fixed Whimsy with an expression of subdued delight. You're enjoying this, she said. Madam, replied Whimsy, I take no pleasure in blood, though I will admit a fascination with its tributaries. Well then, she said, you ought to know that Mr. Damery came to the library last Thursday and requested a book he had never previously shown the slightest interest in, the Compendium of Candle Rituals, a liturgical and superstitious history. I'd shelved it under theological curiosities. It hadn't been borrowed in years. How very suggestive, murmured Whimsy. And did he return it? No, nor did he dog-ear the pages, which I found equally suspicious. But he did leave behind a scrap of paper. I assumed it was a note for himself. She passed him a folded square of foolscap. On it was scrawled, Time does not burn evenly. Observe the 5th. They are watching. Whimsy read it twice. A charming fragment. It has the flavor of madness or metaphor, though one can never quite distinguish between the two in literary circles. I thought you might make more of it than I, said Miss Slynn, rising. Though I must say, Lord Peter, you're not half so pompous as I'd expected. That is the nicest thing anyone has said to me all day. Bunter, walk Miss Slynn out and offer her a reward in the form of whatever biscuits remain. Left alone, Whimsy folded the note and stared thoughtfully at the stub of candle still on the ledge. Time does not burn evenly, he murmured, and yet... He looked up as Arbuthnot entered, holding a sheaf of files. Background on Julian Tesk, the inspector said. You'll want to see this. Oh, yes, said Whimsy, taking the papers. I very much suspect I shall. Lord Peter Whimsy sat by the altar steps, long legs folded with improbable elegance, and reviewed the contents of the inspector's dossier with that peculiar expression of serene incredulity which always meant, to those who knew him, that some small mental cog had just clicked into place. The pages whispered faintly in his gloved hands. School records, a probation report, and a faded article clipped from a local paper. The portrait they sketched was grainy and incomplete, like a half-developed photograph. Julian Tesk, only child of Winifred Tesk, widow, haberdasher. Educated privately by Mr. Quentin Damery for 3 years between the ages of 13 and 16. Suffered a head injury following a bicycle collision near the vicarage gate. Subsequently withdrawn from his studies, declared medically fragile and placed under home supervision. Brief period in psychiatric convalescence in Reading. No criminal record, but 3 notations of antisocial conduct from parish constables, the nature of which remained unspecific but suggestive. Of particular note, he had been seen in the church on the night of All Saints, photographing architecture, according to Mrs. Rowbotham. Wimsey tapped the corner of the page against his knee. "Arbuthnot," he said. "Do we know whether Mr. Tesk owns any photographic equipment?" "According to his mother, no," replied the inspector. "Says the boy keeps odd hours and speaks less than he used to, but claims he hasn't touched a camera since school days. Curious. People who no longer take photographs rarely venture into churches at night to photograph architecture. Bunter, remind me, was there any evidence of photography among the effects in the vestry?" "No, my lord," said Bunter promptly. "However, I did observe a slight smudge on the east window, a mark suggestive of tripod placement, and there was a faint scent of developer fluid near the font. Not recent, perhaps 12 to 18 hours old." "Excellent." Wimsey rose and dusted off his trousers with an air of misplaced reverence. "Let us pay a visit to young Mr. Tesk before the candle wax cools entirely. There is something distinctly ugly squatting in the middle of this little Gothic pageant, and I would prefer it didn't have time to scurry off." They found the Tesk residence tucked behind the greengrocer's, a 2-story building of flaking whitewash and impenetrable lace curtains. The bell was answered by Mrs. Tesk herself, who appeared at the door with a dishcloth in one hand and a braced, defensive smile on her thin lips. "Oh, I thought it might be you," she said to the inspector, before turning her gaze warily to Wimsey. "You're the one they say was in the war but talks like a professor." "A fair characterization," said Wimsey amiably. "May we come in, Mrs. Tesk? We should like a word with your son if it's not too inconvenient. Though, of course," he added, glancing at the faint tremor of her hands, "if he is unwell, we shan't press unduly." She hesitated. "He's in his room, upstairs, but he doesn't see many people." "Then perhaps he'll make an exception for a nobleman and a constable," said Wimsey, stepping lightly over the threshold before she could summon further protest. Bunter followed, carrying a small leather portfolio. The sitting room bore a smell of scorched wool and lavender polish, with every surface covered in lace doilies or miniature china animals. On the hearth was an unlit fire, beside it a collection of candles in brass holders. Ordinary, unremarkable. Wimsey paused by one, touching its edge. "Interesting," he murmured. "All new. No signs of wax dribble, perhaps unused?" "There for emergencies," said Mrs. Tesk, folding her arms. "We've had outages before. Julian keeps to himself, but he's not mad, if that's what you're thinking." "We rarely think anyone mad," said Wimsey gently. "At least not until they start quoting Revelation or poisoning tea. May we see the boy?" Wordlessly, she turned and led them up a narrow flight of stairs. At the top, she knocked once on a closed door, then retreated, her feet receding like guilty thoughts. The door opened slowly. Julian Tesk stood behind it, pale as dust, his face pinched and ghostly in the mid-morning light. He looked not more than 20, though Wimsey knew he was at least 26. His hair was neatly combed, his collar askew, and he wore the uneasy expression of one who lives chiefly in his own mind and finds visitors trespassers by default. "May we come in?" said Wimsey. Julian blinked, hesitated, and then stepped aside. The room was small, cluttered, and curiously sterile. Bookshelves lined with theology and occult history, a neatly made bed, and a table by the window strewn with papers, empty matchboxes, and a single unlabeled photograph face down. Wimsey wandered in, studying the walls as though they might spontaneously begin to confess. Arbuthnot remained near the door. Bunter took up a position beside the window, where the curtains had been pinned back with an old shoehorn. "You were in the church last night," said Wimsey without preamble. Julian's mouth worked a moment before he replied. "Not last night, The night before, All Saints' Eve, I like the shadows. I photograph angles." "And did Mr. Damery know you were there?" "No," he said quickly. "I didn't speak to him. I didn't know he'd be there." "But he was," said Wimsey, "lying dead on the chancel floor when the vicar came in for prayers. You must understand why your visit raises questions." "I didn't kill him," Julian said quietly. "No," said Wimsey, lifting the photograph from the desk and turning it over. It was the same schoolboy group Miss Slynn had provided, only this one bore no ink markings, merely a crease down the center and a smudge where a thumb had lingered too long. "You've kept this," Wimsey said. "For years." Julian nodded, eyes lowered. "He taught you," said Wimsey. "Was he cruel?" There was a long pause. "He was precise," Julian said finally. "Too precise. He measured words the way others measure weight. You always knew when you'd fallen short, even when he didn't say it outright." "And did you fall short, Julian?" Another pause. "He said I had no discipline, that I would never master a classical mind." "I see," said Wimsey. "And so you photographed the place where he prayed, and perhaps hoped the architecture would grant you the symmetry he denied?" Julian looked up, startled. "I'm something of a student of failed pupils," said Wimsey, smiling faintly. "Tell me, did you leave anything behind in the church? A note? A photograph?" "No," Julian said firmly. "Not even a matchbook?" Wimsey moved to the table, lifted one of the matchboxes. Empty. Another. Half full. A third, and under it, a smudged piece of wax-coated twine. "Well, well," murmured Wimsey. "This might almost be the fifth candle." He turned to Arbuthnot. "Inspector, I suggest you search the font. I believe something of significance may be hidden there. Perhaps a photographic plate or a document. Something our friend here would not wish damaged by water or fire." Julian flinched. It was almost imperceptible, but Wimsey saw it and smiled. "No need to be alarmed. I don't believe you killed him, but I do believe you saw who did, and that you've spent the past day convincing yourself it wasn't real." Julian sank onto the bed, his hands twisting the fabric of his trousers. "There was someone," he whispered, "after I left. I'd gone back for my tripod. I heard voices, and then the candles flared. All of them, as if—" "Yes," said Wimsey, "as if they'd all been lit at once. And then there was a scream, but it was short, like someone had meant to scream longer." "Who was it, Julian?" "I couldn't see. Just a shape, cloaked, tall, but I think it might have been—" He hesitated, lips trembling. "Yes, I think it was the vicar." There was a silence. Bunter turned his head slightly. "The vicar," Wimsey repeated. "Now that is most enlightening, though I rather think it may be the one person it cannot be." He rose, smoothing his lapel. "Arbuthnot, have the font searched and bring the vicar in for a word. Gently, mind. We mustn't frighten the clergy unnecessarily." He turned at the door, his voice light. "Mr. Tesk, you've been very helpful and very brave, but I'm afraid the candles are growing shorter and time—" He glanced at the sun through the open curtain. "Does not always burn evenly." The next morning dawned grey and muted, as if the heavens themselves had been instructed to hold their breath in anticipation. Lord Peter Wimsey arrived at St. Agnes's vicarage promptly at 10, accompanied by Inspector Arbuthnot and his ever-efficient valet, Bunter. The village still bore the same air of tentative calm that had settled after the initial shock of Mr. Damery's death, but beneath the surface, the currents of suspicion churned quietly. The vicar, Reverend Alistair Mallory, was a man in his late 50s, with a neatly trimmed beard and a habit of adjusting his clerical collar nervously. He greeted them in the small sitting room, a cluster of well-thumbed theological texts and a brass crucifix on the mantelpiece lending the space an air of solemnity. "Lord Peter," he said, extending a hand, which Wimsey shook with characteristic gentility. I must admit, this whole affair has left us rather shaken." "Indeed, Reverend," said Wimsey, his tone dry but not unkind. "A tragedy for the parish, and a mystery that I hope will not remain a riddle for long." Arbuthnot wasted no time. "Reverend Mallory, we understand you were at the church late on All Saints' Eve, around midnight. Can you tell us what happened that night?" The vicar nodded, folding his hands in his lap. "Yes, I had come to say prayers in the chancel. I found Mr. Demery's body there, quite suddenly. I was the first to discover it. I remember the candles. Odd, almost unnaturally short, as if they'd burned down faster than usual. And there was a faint smell, something like turpentine." Wimsey's eyes narrowed slightly. "The candles, Reverend. Did you notice if they were lit when you arrived?" "No," Mallory replied. "The altar candles were all but extinguished, their wicks blackened, but there was no flame. I lit a match to examine the body more clearly." "Did you see anyone else in the church that night?" "No," he said, "but I heard footsteps in the nave. I thought it was Mr. Tesk, who is fond of wandering the church late. But when I called, there was no answer. It was unsettling." "Unsettling, yes." Wimsey's voice was measured, the hint of irony faint but unmistakable. "You say you heard footsteps, but saw no one. Pray, do you believe in ghosts, Reverend?" Mallory's mouth tightened. "I'm a man of faith, Lord Peter, not superstition." "Quite so," said Wimsey, turning to Arbuthnot. "And did you find anything unusual in the church, Inspector?" Arbuthnot produced a small, damp packet from his coat pocket. "We located this beneath the font, as Lord Peter suggested. It contains photographic plates. Negatives, I believe." Wimsey took the packet carefully, holding it up to the light filtering through the window. "Fascinating. It seems our friend Mr. Tesk's nocturnal excursions were not without purpose." He looked toward the vicar. "Reverend, have you any knowledge of Mr. Tesk's interest in photography or his mental state in recent months?" Mallory hesitated. "Julian is troubled. The accident left him fragile, as you know. He has withdrawn greatly since, but I had no inkling of any particular obsession with photography." "Yet the plates suggest otherwise," said Wimsey, gently tapping the packet. "Tell me, Reverend, did you know of any dispute between Mr. Damery and anyone? Perhaps with the young man or other parishioners?" Mallory's face grew pale. Mr. Damery was a strict man, and his methods were not always popular. There was talk of a disagreement with a local landowner, but nothing more than heated words. With Julian, he was firm, but fair, as far as I know. "Ah, but that is often the paradox of strictness," said Wimsey. "Firmness is rarely perceived as fairness by those who bear it." The conversation paused briefly as Bunter entered, quietly handing Wimsey a sheaf of notes. The detective scanned them quickly. "Thank you, Bunter," he said. "It appears Mr. Damery was involved in something far more complicated than a mere theological dispute. These letters, unsigned but clearly written in haste, suggest blackmail. Someone was threatening to reveal secrets best kept buried." Mallory's eyebrows shot up. "Blackmail? In this quiet parish? Preposterous." "Preposterous until proven otherwise," Wimsey said with a wry smile. "We shall need to investigate further." As the visitors departed the vicarage, Wimsey lingered to peer at the church spire, its silhouette stark against the morning sky. The soft echo of a bell tolled distantly, the sound muffled yet oddly insistent. "There is rhythm in the silence," he murmured, "a cadence that speaks when others refuse." Back at the church, Arbuthnot and Bunter examined the font and surrounding area more thoroughly. The brass basin gleamed faintly, but it was the base that drew their attention, a small, almost imperceptible scratch on the underside. "Look here," Bunter said, pointing to the mark. "Could be a tool mark." Arbuthnot nodded. "Likely someone tried to pry something loose." Wimsey crouched beside them, peering closely. "Indeed. A hidden compartment, perhaps." With a careful hand, Bunter traced the edge until a faint click echoed through the quiet. A narrow cavity opened, revealing a folded envelope, yellowed with age. "Open it, Bunter," Wimsey said softly. Inside lay a letter, the ink faded but legible. "To whom it may concern, the sins of the past have a way of lighting the present candle. Beware the shadows cast by trust betrayed." Wimsey's eyes glittered. A cryptic warning, most unpleasantly timed. Someone desired to unsettle the good vicar, or perhaps Mr. Damery himself. The investigation deepened as Wimsey pieced together the puzzle of the candle wax. The candles on the altar had indeed burned unevenly, their wicks trimmed short and charred at irregular intervals. Scientific inquiry might have suggested tampering with the wick length or the use of different wax blends to alter burn rates. "Meticulous trickery," Wimsey said. "A device to confuse the timeline, to make it appear that time stretched or contracted, depending on one's needs. But to what end?" Arbuthnot frowned. "To cover up the time of death?" "Precisely. And by manipulating the appearance of the candles, the killer hoped to establish an alibi or implicate someone else." The day wore on with interviews of the villagers, each alibi examined and dissected. The seamstress who claimed to have seen a shadow near the church at midnight, the innkeeper who swore the vicar left the pub at 11, and the butler, Mr. Hargreaves, whose own movements seemed more furtive than straightforward. Wimsey, however, paid particular attention to the smallest details. A misplaced button on the butler's coat, a faint smell of cologne where none should be, the clink of keys heavier than expected. Each was a note in the symphony of clues that only he could discern. As evening descended, Wimsey stood once more at the churchyard gate, the ancient yew trees casting long fingers of shade across the path. He lit a cigar with the calm deliberation of a man unhurried by time or circumstance. "To short candles and longer shadows," he mused aloud. Bunter approached quietly. "My lord, shall we prepare for the night's observations? There is talk of a midnight vigil near the churchyard." "Indeed, Bunter, the night is the canvas on which secrets are most clearly painted." And with that, Lord Peter Wimsey settled into the waiting game, where silence spoke louder than voices, and patience was the sharpest instrument of all. The chill of the night crept over the village with a deliberate, almost malevolent patience. Lord Peter Wimsey and Bunter, cloaked in shadows, took up their vantage point beneath the twisted branches of a gnarled oak that leaned over the churchyard wall. The sky was a sullen grey-black, a canopy pierced here and there by faint pinpricks of indifferent stars. A faint wind stirred the leaves, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and old stone. Wimsey's eyes, sharp and unblinking, scanned the darkened lanes and the church's ancient facade. The candlelight from the altar had long since been extinguished, yet something intangible still flickered in the atmosphere. A restless whisper, an unseen presence that refused to be dismissed as mere superstition. "Patience, Bunter," Wimsey murmured, his voice low and steady. "The night will tell its tale if one knows how to listen." Bunter nodded silently, the butt of his umbrella resting against the wall, his keen gaze following Wimsey's every movement. Minutes stretched into an hour, marked only by the distant tolling of the church bell signaling midnight. It was then, just as the last chime faded into the ether, that a figure emerged from the shadows. A tall, slender man wrapped in a heavy overcoat, his steps careful and deliberate as he approached the side door of the church. "Julian Tesk," whispered Wimsey, "our elusive photographer." The man paused at the door, glancing furtively over his shoulder before drawing a keyring from his pocket. The soft click of the lock echoed faintly, and the door swung open with a quiet creak. Tesk slipped inside, the heavy door shutting behind him with a thud that seemed to vibrate through the stillness. Wimsey folded his arms, a faint smile curling his lips. "Now, let us see what secrets the shadows guard." They waited, eyes glued to the church windows, watching for any sign of movement. 20 minutes passed, then 30 before Tesk re-emerged, clutching a small satchel tightly. He glanced once more round the empty churchyard, then slipped away into the dark streets, melting seamlessly into the night. Whimsy exhaled slowly, the thin plume of smoke from his cigar dissipating like a ghost in the cool air. We must follow. The pursuit was cautious but swift, the winding lanes and narrow alleys offering ample cover. Tesk's route led them through the village to a disused coach house on the edge of the parish. The building loomed, its windows shuttered and its stone walls cloaked in ivy and neglect. Inside, the faint glow of a lamp flickered through the cracks. Whimsy and Bunter approached quietly, hearing the unmistakable click of a camera shutter and the whisper of a voice murmuring to itself. With the deftness of a practiced sleuth, Whimsy picked the lock of the side door and they slipped inside. The coach house was cluttered with photographic equipment, stacks of plates and papers scattered amid tripods and chemical baths. At the center, Julian Tesk sat hunched over a workbench, developing negatives with meticulous care. "Ah, Lord Peter," Tesk said without turning, his voice weary but defiant. "I wondered when you'd appear." Whimsy stepped forward, his tone amused but firm. "We are grateful for the invitation, Julian, though I suspect your nocturnal activities bear more weight than mere artistic pursuit." Tesk's eyes flashed briefly in the lamplight. "You think I have something to hide, sir, perhaps, but it is not what you imagine." "Then enlighten us," said Whimsy, settling on a rickety stool. "What are these photographs, and what have they to do with the unfortunate Mr. Demary?" Tesk sighed, releasing the tension in his shoulders. "They are images of the church interior, taken over the past weeks. Shadows, angles, subtle details. I was searching for something unusual, a sign, a clue to the strange happenings that have unsettled us all." Whimsy leaned in, intrigued. "And what did you find?" Tesk hesitated, then reached for a plate, holding it up to the light. The negative revealed a faint, almost imperceptible smear near the altar, an anomaly in the otherwise pristine stonework. "Faint but undeniable," Whimsy observed, studying the plate closely. "Could this be the source of the turpentine smell reported by Reverend Mallory?" "Exactly," Tesk said. "I believe someone has been tampering with the altar itself, concealing something beneath the stone." Whimsy nodded thoughtfully. "Then it seems our mystery grows deeper. But who and for what purpose?" The conversation was interrupted by a sudden noise, a creaking floorboard near the entrance. All three men turned sharply, eyes narrowing in the semi-darkness. From the shadows emerged a figure, slender and cloaked, face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. "You shouldn't be here," the stranger said, voice cold and edged with warning. Whimsy's hand twitched toward his pocket, but he remained composed. "And you are?" "Meredith Blythe," the woman replied, stepping forward with a deliberate grace. "I am the housekeeper to the Damery estate." Her gaze flicked to Tesk with unmistakable disdain. "And you, Julian, are meddling in affairs far beyond your understanding." Tesk bristled. "I seek only the truth." Blythe's eyes hardened. "Truth is a luxury for those who can afford it. For the rest of us, it is a weapon." Whimsy regarded her keenly. "A weapon, Miss Blythe? Pray, what is your interest in Mr. Damery's death?" She smiled thinly. "I was loyal to the family, but loyalty can breed enemies." "Indeed," Whimsy replied smoothly. "Tell me, have you noticed anything unusual? Any visitors, disturbances, or whispered threats?" Blythe's expression flickered, but she masked it well. "Nothing that cannot be explained by small-town gossip." Whimsy exchanged a glance with Arbuthnot, who had silently arrived behind them, his presence commanding. "Miss Blythe, we shall need to examine the Demary estate more closely," Arbuthnot said. She nodded reluctantly. "Very well." but be warned, some stones are better left unturned. The night deepened as they left the coach house, the tension thickening like fog. The revelations of hidden compartments, cryptic letters, and shadowy figures painted a picture both intricate and troubling. Whimsy's mind raced, connecting threads that seemed tangential but must surely converge. The manipulation of candle burn times to distort chronology, the blackmail hinted at in the vicar's letter, the tampering beneath the altar, each spoke of a carefully orchestrated deception. Yet who was the architect? Was it the troubled Julian, haunted by his past and seeking solace in his art? Or Meredith Blythe, whose loyalty masked darker ambitions, or someone else entirely, lurking just beyond sight? As dawn threatened the horizon, Whimsy lit another cigar, the smoke curling like a veil around his thoughts. "The night is full of whispers," he said softly, "and the candles may be short, but the flame of truth burns longer than we imagine." Bunter, ever the pragmatist, touched Whimsy's sleeve. "Shall we proceed to the estate, my lord? The answers surely lie there." "Quite so, Bunter. Let us prepare to peel back the final layers, for in mysteries such as these, the smallest detail is often the key that unlocks the whole." And with measured steps and minds alight, they set forth into the breaking day, the village of St. Agnes, still cloaked in secrets, waiting for the dawn of revelation. The Damery estate greeted them at dawn with the muted grandeur of a house weighed down by too many years and too many secrets. The sun struggled to pierce the heavy clouds that hung low, casting the grounds in a washed-out gray. Ivy clung stubbornly to the stone walls, and the clipped yew hedges stood like silent sentinels along the gravel drive. Inside, the house was a contrast of faded elegance and restrained disorder. Tapestries hung askew, their rich colors dulled by dust. Portraits of stern ancestors watched impassively from their gilded frames. The pervasive scent of old wood, mustiness, and faint traces of turpentine filled the air, a reminder of the disturbed altar and the unsettling presence of things hidden beneath the surface. Whimsy's eyes took in every detail with a surgeon's precision, noting the placement of furniture, the slight misalignment of a carpet, the peculiar arrangement of a dozen candles on the mantelpiece, shortened as though they had been hastily extinguished and replaced. The discrepancies were slight, yet in them lay the first tremors of the deeper truth. Meredith Blythe moved with a careful grace through the rooms, the lines of worry and determination etched on her face. Arbuthnot followed closely, his demeanor all business, while Bunter's quiet presence brought a grounded steadiness to the group. In the drawing-room, Whimsy stopped before the mantel, scrutinizing the candles once more. Short candles, yes, and rather unevenly burned. The timing, perhaps, of the final candle extinguishing is the key to the sequence of events on that dreadful evening. "Is that not rather subtle for a culprit?" Arbuthnot asked. "Would they go to such lengths?" Whimsy's smile was a thin curve of amusement. "Precisely, Inspector. When the crime demands a disguise of chance and coincidence, the criminal resorts to minutiae, small, easily overlooked details that convince us of randomness, but which actually form the skeleton of an alibi. Like the tampering. Beneath the altar," Meredith interjected softly, "I found the panel loose when I dusted the sanctuary last week, but I thought nothing of it at the time." Whimsy's eyes gleamed. "A panel, Miss Blythe, that concealed a cavity. What was hidden there?" She hesitated before retrieving a small, dust-encrusted box from a drawer in the sideboard. Inside lay a stack of brittle letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon, yellowed with age and the faint smell of lavender. "Correspondence between the late Mr. Damery and an unknown correspondent," Meredith explained. "The writing is hurried, but there are references to money, threats, and, most curiously, the secret we bury beneath the light." Whimsy raised an eyebrow. Cryptic and illuminating, perhaps. As they turned the brittle pages, a clearer picture emerged. The letters revealed Damery's desperate attempts to stave off ruin and scandal, a blackmail scheme involving the undisclosed contents beneath the church altar. The secret was not merely financial, but deeply personal, threatening reputations and lives. Bunter's voice broke the silence. "If the altar conceals a secret, might it be related to the smell of turpentine, my lord?" "Very likely," Wimsey answered, rising. "Turpentine is a painter's solvent. An artist might use it to alter or perhaps to erase evidence. Our photographer, Mr. Tesk, hinted at shadows and smears. Could the altar have been a canvas for deception?" They moved to the church, the weight of history pressing down as the morning mist began to lift. The altar stood solemn, a monument to faith and time, but now revealed as the stage for something far more sinister. Wimsey knelt, running his gloved fingers along the stonework. He tapped gently, listening for hollow sounds. The faintest echo betrayed the panel's false nature. With practiced hands, he removed the panel, exposing a shallow cavity. Inside lay a small bundle wrapped in oilskin. Carefully, Wimsey extracted its contents, a series of sketches and photographs, portraits of individuals, some unmistakably villagers, others unknown, each marked with cryptic annotations and dates. "Portraits and dates, my dear Bunter," Wimsey mused. "A timeline of connections, relationships, perhaps blackmail targets." One photograph, in particular, caught their attention. A sharply angled image of a woman standing beneath the church tower, her face obscured by shadow, but her posture unmistakably defiant. The date was recent. "Who is she?" Arbuthnot asked. Wimsey's gaze was thoughtful. "That, Inspector, is a question that may unlock the final piece of this puzzle." Returning to the estate, they shared their discoveries with Meredith Blythe, whose composure finally cracked. "I feared such things. The Damery family harbored many secrets, but this is darker than mere gossip or scandal." Wimsey nodded gravely. "Secrets often breed desperation, and desperation breeds crime." As the day progressed, they interviewed the household staff and villagers, their testimonies revealing fractures beneath the surface civility. A cook who spoke of whispered arguments behind closed doors, a gardener who noticed unfamiliar visitors at odd hours, a maid uneasy about the late-night comings and goings of Julian Tesk. Each account, seemingly trivial, wove a tapestry of suspicion and intrigue. Wimsey's questions, though polite, bore the weight of subtle interrogation. He noted the nervous glances, the clipped answers, the telling silences. "Tell me," he asked the cook, "did you observe any alterations to the curtains or furnishings in the drawing-room recently?" The cook blinked. "Now you mention it, sir. The curtains were drawn tighter some nights, and the carpet near the hearth seemed to have been shifted." Wimsey's smile was faint but sharp. "Interesting. These adjustments often mask entrances or exits, or perhaps conceal evidence." Later, Wimsey sat alone in the library, poring over the letters and photographs. A pattern emerged. Dates aligning with village events, visits from particular individuals, cryptic references to the burning of the past and the cost of silence. His mind traced the connections carefully, dismissing red herrings and focusing on inconsistencies. The candle burns, the tampered panel, the secret correspondence, and the mysterious woman's photograph all pointed toward a carefully constructed narrative of deceit. Yet one question gnawed persistently. Who stood to gain the most from this carefully orchestrated web? Meredith Blythe, for all her loyalty, had her own motives, as did Julian Tesk, but the true culprit remained shrouded, hidden behind layers of misdirection. As twilight approached, Wimsey gathered the household. His manner was calm, yet there was an unmistakable intensity in his gaze. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "the truth is seldom what it appears. We have uncovered secrets buried beneath stone and shadow, but it is the human heart that harbors the deepest mysteries." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. In the coming hours, we shall revisit the scenes of deception, retrace steps, and illuminate the shadows where falsehoods thrive. For the candles may be short, but the flame of justice, once kindled, burns resolutely. With that, the house seemed to hold its breath, the fragile veneer of civility stretched taut, waiting for the final unmasking to come. The evening settled over the Demary estate like a slow curtain, dimming the edges of the day and sharpening the shadows that clung to every corner. Whimsy moved through the halls with deliberate quiet, the flicker of candlelight tracing his path as he revisited the scenes of the crime. The house itself seemed to breathe, a living entity steeped in whispered tensions and unspoken truths. Bunter followed at a respectful distance, carrying a small lantern whose glow cast dancing light across the worn parquet floors. Arbuthnot and Meredith lingered in the main hall, their faces a study in restrained apprehension. Whimsy paused before the drawing-room fireplace, his eyes catching the slight displacement in the carpet that the cook had mentioned earlier. Kneeling, he ran his fingers along the edge where the floor met the hearth. A faint ridge suggested something had recently been shifted, perhaps a loose floorboard or a concealed compartment. Carefully, he peeled back the carpet's corner, revealing a narrow wooden panel. With a gentle lift, it came free, exposing a small hollow beneath. Inside lay a bundle of papers, wrapped hastily in oilcloth and stained with time. Unfolding the documents, Whimsy found a series of ledger pages, the handwriting cramped and urgent. They chronicled payments and debts, but more disturbingly, coded entries that hinted at threats and bribes involving several villagers. The most telling was a reference to the final extinguishing scheduled precisely on the night of Mr. Damery's death. "Bunter," Whimsy murmured, "fetch Arbuthnot and Miss Blythe. There are revelations here that must be shared immediately." As the others joined him, Whimsy laid out the documents on the low table. The ledger painted a complex web of financial desperation and clandestine arrangements, implicating not only Demary, but several prominent figures in the village. It seemed the dead man had been ensnared in a network of blackmail and extortion. Meredith's composure faltered as she scanned the pages. "I had no idea it was this deep. If the family knew, they kept it well hidden." Arbuthnot's gaze hardened. "This changes everything. We're no longer dealing with a simple death, but a premeditated act entwined with greed and fear." Whimsy nodded. "Indeed. And the phrase, 'final extinguishing,' suggests the murderer intended to seal the truth forever, like snuffing out a candle to hide the flame." They agreed to inspect the church altar once more, this time with the knowledge of the ledger and the implication of coded messages. The night air was thick with expectancy as they crossed the dew-soaked grounds under a moon veiled by shifting clouds. Inside the sanctuary, Whimsy's keen eyes returned to the altar stone. He examined the cavity beneath the loose panel, noting the faint traces of turpentine and smudged charcoal marks. These were attempts to obscure evidence, perhaps initials or symbols indicating ownership or betrayal. Could these be linked to the woman in the photograph? Arbuthnot inquired. Whimsy considered this. Most likely. Her presence near the church on the date corresponding with the ledger entries suggests she was involved, either as victim, perpetrator, or witness. A sudden sound interrupted their focus, a soft scraping from the vestry. They exchanged glances and moved cautiously toward the source. Behind the door, they found a small, crumpled piece of paper caught beneath a cabinet leg. Whimsy picked it up carefully. It bore a hastily scrawled message. "Meet me where the shadows hide, before the last candle dies." The note's urgency was unmistakable, and the phrase echoed the cryptic language found in the ledger and letters. "This is no coincidence," Whimsy said. "The murderer or an accomplice is attempting a rendezvous, perhaps to retrieve evidence or silence another witness." They decided to stake out the churchyard, placing themselves strategically in the shadows where the note's sender might appear. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the distant barking of a dog and the occasional rustle of leaves. Then, a figure materialized from the darkness, a slender silhouette moving cautiously toward the altar. The figure paused beneath the tower, glanced furtively around, and bent to retrieve an object from a hidden nook in the stonework. Whimsy signaled the others, and with quiet steps, they surrounded the figure. "Stop," he commanded. The figure froze, then slowly raised hands in surrender as the moonlight revealed the face of Julian Tesk. "I didn't mean harm," Tesk said, voice trembling. "I only wanted to preserve the truth." Whimsy approached, eyes searching. "Why these secret meetings? Why the cryptic notes?" Tesk swallowed hard. "Because the truth is dangerous. There are those who will kill to keep it buried." He produced a small bundle, papers and photographs that confirmed his earlier suspicions, blackmail, threats, and a conspiracy extending beyond the village. Meredith Blythe's voice was steady but cold as she stepped forward. "It seems loyalty is a scarce commodity in these parts." Whimsy's gaze flicked to her. "Miss Blythe, your role in this is more complicated than you have let on." She met his eyes without flinching. "I protect what I must, but I will not be a pawn in a game of lies." The night air tightened with tension as the pieces began to lock into place. The murderer was desperate, entangled in a web of deceit, but trapped by the very schemes intended to protect them. Whimsy's mind raced to assemble the final image, a portrait painted in shadows and whispered threats, where every secret held a price and every light cast a shadow. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "we confront the heart of the matter. The last candle burns low, but when it is extinguished, the truth will blaze like a beacon." And with that promise hanging in the cold dawn, the night surrendered its hold, leaving only the faintest glow of hope for justice yet to come. The first light of morning crept through the tall, mullioned windows of Damery Hall, casting long, pale beams across the heavy carpets and faded wallpaper. The house, still steeped in the somber weight of the previous night's revelations, seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of the day ahead. Whimsy sat in the library, surrounded by the scattered papers and photographs that had become the lifeblood of the investigation. His fingers traced a map of connections laid out before him, dates, faces, places, all converging into a web that tightened with every passing hour. The quiet was broken by a soft knock, and Bunter entered with a tray bearing tea and a small note. Whimsy unfolded the slip of paper, his eyes narrowing as he read the terse message. "Meet me in the West Wing. Urgent. M." "Meredith," Whimsy said aloud, folding the note carefully. "It appears she wishes to speak in private." Bunter nodded and withdrew silently. Moments later, Meredith Blythe appeared, her face pale but resolute. "I've been wrestling with what to reveal," she admitted. "But the time for half-truths has passed. There are things you must know if we are to end this." Whimsy gestured toward a chair. "Please do sit. Whatever you have to say will be received with the utmost attention." As Meredith settled into the worn leather seat, her voice dropped to a whisper. "There is a history here, long buried beneath layers of denial and fear. The Damery family, for generations, kept a secret that could ruin not just their name, but the standing of several prominent families in the village." Whimsy listened intently as she spoke of clandestine meetings, illicit affairs, and a scandal that had been carefully suppressed decades ago. The secret beneath the light, referenced in the letters, she revealed, was tied not only to blackmail, but to a betrayal of trust, one that had led to broken lives and silent suffering. "But why now?" Whimsy asked. "Why surface this turmoil at the heart of a murder investigation?" "Because the past refuses to stay buried," Meredith said, her eyes fixed on a distant point. Julian Tesk was not only a photographer, but a seeker of truths that others wished to keep hidden. He believed exposing the network of deceit was necessary, even if it meant personal risk. The room seemed to grow colder as whimsy absorbed the weight of her confession. And the woman in the photograph? Meredith's lips pressed into a thin line. She is my sister, Helena. She vanished years ago after becoming entangled in the same web of secrets. Her reappearance near the church was no accident. She sought to confront those responsible for her exile. Whimsy felt the puzzle pieces shift. Helena's presence adds a new dimension to this tragedy. If she confronted the conspirators, she too might have been a target. Meredith nodded slowly. I feared as much. That night, the house was not merely the scene of a murder, but a battleground of hidden agendas and desperate acts. Whimsy rose, pacing the length of the room as he pieced together the narrative. We have the ledger of payments, the coded notes, the hidden compartments, and the witnesses' testimonies, all pointing to a coordinated effort to silence threats. But someone miscalculated, he continued. The killing was meant to protect the secret, yet it has instead illuminated it. He paused, eyes gleaming with determination. We must confront the suspects with the full extent of what we know. The veil of secrecy will fall today. The morning wore on as Whimsy and Arbuthnot gathered the household and key villagers in the grand drawing room. The atmosphere was taut, each person wary of the other, like players waiting for the final act to unfold. Whimsy began by recounting the discoveries. The ledger's incriminating entries, the hidden cavity beneath the altar, and the significance of the coded messages. As you can see, he said, the death of Mr. Damery was not a random act, but a calculated attempt to prevent truths from emerging. The question remains, who was the hand that struck in darkness? One by one he addressed the suspects, watching their faces for cracks in the armor of denial. Meredith's sister Helena, still absent, was a shadow hanging over the room. The household staff exchanged uneasy glances, while Julian Tesk's involvement as both witness and possible conspirator complicated the landscape. Whimsy's gaze settled on Meredith herself. Miss Blythe, you have been candid with us, but there are moments when omission can speak as loudly as confession. She met his eyes steadily. I did what I had to. Protecting Helena meant protecting the family's future. And yet, protection through silence has only bred more violence. A murmur rippled through the assembled group as the pieces of the story began to coalesce. The villagers, once merely background figures, emerged as active participants in the tangled drama, each with their motives, fears, and secrets. Whimsy then turned to Inspector Arbuthnot. I believe it is time to examine the physical evidence one last time, the place where the fatal blow was struck, and the altar that hides more than stone. Together they retraced the steps to the church, where the morning sun now warmed the worn stone and illuminated the carved details. The air was crisp, and the sound of birdsong contrasted starkly with the grim purpose of their visit. Whimsy knelt near the altar once more, tracing a faint line in the dust that suggested recent disturbance. The killer returned here after the murder, to conceal or retrieve something, he said. Suddenly, Bunter called softly from the side. Sir, there's an imprint here. Footprints pressed into the soft earth beneath the stone threshold. Whimsy examined them carefully. Recent and deliberately obscured. Could they belong to the woman in the photograph? Arbuthnot wondered aloud. Possibly. Or to someone trying to mimic her movements to mislead us. The investigation narrowed like a lens, focusing sharply on the delicate interplay of deception and desperation. As they turned to leave, a faint sound stopped them, a whisper of movement among the shadows at the edge of the churchyard. Whimsy's hand went instinctively to his pocket, fingers closing around a small notebook. From the gloom stepped Helena Blythe herself, her eyes fierce yet weary, bearing the weight of years spent in exile. I have waited, she said quietly, for the truth to be spoken, for justice to be claimed. Her presence shattered the fragile calm, bringing the hidden into the light. Whimsy regarded her with a mixture of sympathy and resolve. "Miss Blythe, you hold a key piece of this puzzle. Together we shall see the full picture revealed." The threads of the past and present intertwined at last, drawing toward the moment where secrets would be unmasked and the final truth laid bare. Helena Blythe's arrival in the cool morning air seemed to shift the atmosphere of the churchyard entirely. Her eyes, sharp and unwavering despite the hardships she must have endured, met Whimsy's with a mixture of defiance and hope. She stepped fully into the clearing, the tall shadows of the tower stretching long behind her, as if the building itself guarded her presence like a sentinel reluctant to reveal secrets. Arbuthnot and Bunter fell quietly into place beside Whimsy, each aware that this was a pivotal moment in the unraveling of a tangled story. "Miss Blythe," Whimsy began, his tone measured yet inviting, "you have been absent from this village for many years. Now that you are here, will you help us understand what led to the tragedy at Damery Hall?" She hesitated for only a moment, then nodded. "I have waited for the right time, for the burden of silence to be lifted. The truth must be told, even if it brings pain." Whimsy gestured toward the church steps, and they moved as a small group toward the sanctuary's entrance. As they crossed the threshold, Helena's voice lowered, revealing the fragile undercurrent of emotion beneath her composed exterior. "It began long before the death of my brother," she said quietly. "Our family harbored secrets, wounds inflicted by greed and fear, covered with polite smiles and whispered warnings. When I discovered what lay beneath the surface, blackmail, betrayal, lies, I sought to expose it. That was my mistake." Her eyes flicked to the altar, then back to Whimsy. "They told me I was dangerous, that speaking out would destroy us all." Whimsy's gaze softened. Dangerous, perhaps, but also necessary. The fabric of deception must be torn if justice is to be served. Helena's hand trembled slightly as she reached into her coat pocket, producing a small folded document. "This was hidden with a ledger you found. It is a letter, written by my brother the night before his death." Whimsy unfolded the fragile paper carefully, reading the scrawled words aloud. "To whom it may concern, if I perish before this truth is known, let this letter serve as my final confession. I have been trapped by forces I cannot escape, men and women who manipulate the lives of those around them to protect their own secrets. I fear the cost will be great." The room seemed to absorb the weight of the letter's contents, silence settling like dust. Arbuthnot cleared his throat, breaking the stillness. "This confirms premeditation. Damery knew he was in danger. But it also suggests he sought to make amends," Whimsy added. "Perhaps to protect Helena, or to bring the guilty to light." Helena nodded slowly. He hoped to meet with certain villagers, to negotiate peace, or at least to expose the blackmailers. But someone decided that was unacceptable. A faint rustle from the back of the church made them all turn. Bunter pointed discreetly toward a shadowed alcove, where a figure hesitated before stepping forward. It was Julian Tesk, his face drawn and tense. "I have been listening," he said. "There is more to this than just family secrets. The village itself has been ensnared in a web of fear and silence." He held out a small bundle of photographs and letters. "These show payments made to silence dissenters, threats issued to those who dared speak, and evidence of a meeting planned the night of the murder, a meeting that someone wanted to ensure never took place." Whimsy took the documents, studying them carefully. The handwriting matched entries in the ledger. The dates corresponded with entries about final extinguishing and secret rendezvous. The puzzle was almost complete. "But who was the killer?" Meredith asked quietly. "Who could have acted so coldly?" Whimsy's eyes scanned the group gathered in the church, measuring their reactions, their guarded expressions. "Someone who stood to lose everything," he said. "Someone close enough to know the ledger's secrets and the planned meetings. Someone desperate to protect their reputation, their power, or their fortune. His gaze settled on the local magistrate, a man who had so far remained silent, his face pale and inscrutable. The magistrate's lips pressed into a thin line, betraying a flicker of guilt or fear. Whimsy's voice sharpened. "Sir, your name appears repeatedly in these ledgers. You had the most to gain from Damery's silence." The magistrate's composure cracked. I was forced into it. They threatened to ruin me." "But did you kill him?" Whimsy pressed. The man faltered, eyes darting. "No, I swear it. I did what I could to protect myself, but I did not strike the fatal blow." A tense moment stretched between them, then Helena stepped forward, her voice steady and resolute. It was someone else. Someone who did not want negotiations or peace, only control. The gathered faces turned toward the heavy oak doors, now creaking open as footsteps approached. A figure entered, framed by the light. A housekeeper long thought loyal, her expression unreadable, but her eyes cold. "I know the truth," she said quietly, "and I've lived with it for too long." The final confrontation, long inevitable, now hung poised in the fragile morning light. Secrets and lies, loyalty and betrayal, all converged toward a reckoning where the shadowed past would be confronted, and the last candle finally extinguished. The housekeeper's calm declaration hung in the heavy air, as if it alone could dissolve the tangled web of secrets woven over years. Her hands, folded tightly before her, betrayed none of the turmoil beneath the surface, but her eyes, sharp and steady, held a fire that none could ignore. "I have been the keeper of many things," she said, her voice low but resolute. "Not just the keys and the linens, but the whispered fears, the furtive glances, and the grudges hidden behind polite smiles. I know who struck the fatal blow that night." A sudden stillness fell over the room. The villagers, the family, and the investigators alike hung on her words as if the final piece of the puzzle had just been handed to them. Whimsy leaned forward slightly, his keen mind urging her to continue. "Please, do not hold back. Your knowledge is crucial." She swallowed, steadying herself. "That night, after the meeting was supposed to occur, I saw someone leave Damery Hall in haste. It was not the magistrate, nor any of the family. It was Thomas Carow, the steward, a man trusted by all, yet burdened by debts and desperation." A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd. Thomas Carow, the steward, a figure familiar but never suspected, stepped forward, his face pale but defiant. "I admit my debts," he said, "but I am no murderer." Whimsy's gaze remained unwavering. "Then tell us, Mr. Carow, why did you leave the hall that night, and what did you do afterward?" Carow's jaw clenched as he struggled between pride and fear. "I left to clear my head. The tensions in the house were unbearable, but when I returned, I found the body." "That does not explain the ledger entries listing payments you accepted," Arbuthnot said sharply. "Payments to silence a dangerous truth." Carow's shoulders sagged. "I took the money, yes, but only to protect my family. I never wished harm on anyone." Helena stepped forward, eyes blazing. "Protection built on lies breeds only death. You were in a position to prevent the tragedy, yet you chose silence." Before Carow could respond, the housekeeper interrupted. "I followed him that night. I saw him near the chapel, where the body was found." His hands trembled as he held a small, ornate dagger. Gasps echoed around the room. Carow's face twisted with denial. "I found the dagger by chance. It was already stained." "Too convenient," Whimsy said. "The murder weapon was hidden, but you carried it away. That marks you as more than a bystander." Carow's defiance cracked. "I was desperate. They threatened my family if I spoke." "Who?" Whimsy pressed. Carow hesitated, then whispered, "A group, local notables with everything to lose if the ledger were revealed. They used me as a pawn." The magistrate's face paled further, and the room's tension thickened. "I warned you," he said hoarsely. "I tried to contain this." Whimsy's sharp eyes fixed on the magistrate. Containment through fear and bribery only escalates the danger. Turning back to Caro, Whimsy's voice softened slightly. "We understand your position, but the law must be served. Your silence cost a life." Caro's shoulders slumped in defeat. "Then I will tell all I know." As the first light of dawn crept through the stained glass windows, the housekeeper pulled a worn envelope from her apron. "Inside are letters implicating several villagers," she said. "Some still here, some long gone. This secret has poisoned us all." Whimsy took the envelope carefully, sensing that this was the final thread in the tangled narrative. The web of deceit, blackmail, and fear had stretched across generations, ensnaring innocents and guilty alike. "Justice," he said softly, "must begin with truth, and truth, once revealed, has a power all its own." The gathered crowd shifted uneasily as the weight of his words settled over them. The reckoning had begun, and no one could say what fractures it would leave behind. Outside, the village stirred, unaware that the quiet life they knew had been irrevocably changed. The shadows of the past were finally giving way to the harsh light of day. The assembled company awaited in the dimly lit drawing-room of Damery Hall, the shadows pooling in the corners like silent witnesses to the evening's inevitable reckoning. Lord Peter Whimsy, impeccably composed despite the weight of revelations to come, surveyed the gathered faces, each one a mask of tension, curiosity, or dread. He lit a cigarette with the precision of a man accustomed to theatrics, the faint scent mingling with the faint chill that clung to the room. "My dear friends," Whimsy began, "this labyrinthine affair might have confounded lesser minds, but the devil, as ever, resides in the details. Allow me to illuminate the path through this morass of half-truths and carefully constructed alibis." He gestured to the ledger, now resting on the heavy oak table, its pages a testament to the shadowy transactions that had so corrupted the village's facade. Damery Blythe was not merely a victim of circumstance, but a man trapped in a web of his own making, a web spun by those around him, including, notably, the steward, Mr. Caro. A faint ripple of surprise stirred the room. Caro's face was pale but defiant, his hands clenched at his sides. "Yet, though Mr. Caro's involvement is undeniable," Whimsy continued, "the fatal strike was not delivered by his hand. His role was that of an unwitting accomplice, coerced and silenced by fear of a cabal that sought to preserve its comfortable secrecy." He paused, allowing the tension to thicken. "The true murderer, ladies and gentlemen, is someone whose outward respectability concealed a far darker nature. The magistrate, Mr. Aldrich." Gasps erupted, and Aldrich's mask of calm cracked, revealing a flicker of desperation. "The evidence is incontrovertible," Whimsy said, nodding toward the envelope of letters and photographs produced by the housekeeper. "Mr. Aldrich's hand appears repeatedly in these documents, authorizing payments to silence those who threaten to expose the ledger's contents. He feared exposure, not only of his corruption, but of his complicity in the blackmail scheme." Whimsy's voice sharpened. "On the night of the murder, Mr. Aldrich confronted Damery Blythe in the chapel, fearing that Damery would reveal the truth at the planned meeting. When reason failed, he struck. Aldrich's protests faltered under the weight of logic and evidence, and his shoulders slumped in reluctant confession. The candles were all too short, a detail that might seem trivial but is, in fact, telling. Their premature extinguishing was a ruse, concealing the timing of the murder and the absence of witnesses. Whimsy smiled wryly. A neat trick, but one that faltered before the evidence of misaligned clocks and overheard footsteps, all carefully pieced together by the attentive minds of this investigation. Turning to the housekeeper, Whimsy added, "Your courage in coming forward has been invaluable. It is a reminder that sometimes The quietest voices bear the heaviest truth. As the gravity of the situation settled upon the room, Whimsy produced a final thought, his voice tinged with his characteristic irony. It seems that even in the most tranquil of villages, the shadows of human weakness cast long and unsettling shapes. Justice may be blind, but it is not deaf to the whisperings of conscience. With that, he rose, his manner shifting from the cerebral to the subtly theatrical. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a cigar to attend to and a book of Shakespeare to revisit, perhaps something from Hamlet, where the darkness is so much more satisfying when explained. As the doors closed behind him, the hall remained steeped in a silence that was both somber and relieved, the delicate balance between order and chaos momentarily restored. The candles, though short, had finally burned through the night,